The sound of forks and soft laughter still lingered in the air long after the plates had been cleared. Our small dining room was warm, filled with the lingering scent of roasted chicken, baked potatoes, and the faint sweetness of the apple pie I'd made earlier. I had invited only a handful of people that evening. My friend Melissa, her husband Tom, our elderly neighbor Mrs. Harper, and Daniel, a friend from work who'd been helping me with a community project over the past few months. The conversation had been light throughout dinner, but I had noticed Daniel wasn't in much of a hurry to leave. While everyone else slowly gathered their coats and said their goodbyes, he remained seated at the table, swirling the last sip of water in his glass, his gaze somewhere between thoughtful and distant. Melissa hugged me tightly at the door. "That pie was perfect, Emma," she whispered before stepping out into the cool night. Mrs. Harper gave her usual warm smile, telling me to get some rest. And then there was Daniel, still there, still quiet. When I closed the door behind the last guest, the house felt unusually still. I turned back toward the table, expecting Daniel to stand and follow suit, but he simply offered a small smile. "Mind if I help you with the dishes?" he asked. It wasn't an unusual offer. Daniel was thoughtful like that, but something in his tone made me pause. "You don't have to," I said. "It's late, and you've already done enough just being here." "I don't mind," he replied, pushing his chair back slowly. "Sometimes it's nice to take your time before heading back out there." There was something about the way he said it, as though out there meant more than just the quiet street beyond my front porch. We stood side by side at the sink, the rhythm of washing and drying plates filling the air in place of conversation. He was careful, deliberate, making sure each plate was spotless before handing it to me. At first, we spoke about ordinary things, the weather forecast, an upcoming fundraiser, the state of our little town's community center. But gradually, the conversation shifted. "You know," he said, placing a clean plate on the towel, "I never really do this. Stay behind after dinner. Usually, I'm the first to leave." I glanced at him, curious. "Why tonight, then?" He shrugged, drying his hands. I guess I felt like there was more to say. Or maybe I just didn't want the evening to end yet. His words hung in the air. I thought about how unusual it was for me too, letting someone linger like this. After my divorce 2 years ago, my evenings had been quiet and predictable. Work, a quick meal, maybe a phone call with my sister, then bed. Hosting dinner had been a small step toward breaking that pattern. Having Daniel here afterward felt like another step entirely. When the last dish was dried and put away, I offered him tea. He nodded and we moved to the living room. The couch felt a little too big for just 2 people, so he sat in the armchair across from me. We sipped in silence for a while, the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. "You've been carrying a lot lately," he said suddenly. I looked up, startled. "What makes you say that?" He tilted his head slightly. "It's in the way you've been showing up at work. You do everything you're supposed to, but you're somewhere else in your head." I smiled faintly. "I suppose I've been distracted. Is it the house? The bills? Or just everything?" I didn't know why, but his question opened something in me. Maybe it was the quiet, or the fact that he'd stayed behind when no one else had. I found myself talking about things I hadn't told anyone in months, the pressure of keeping my home, the ache of feeling like I had to handle everything alone, the little fears that crept in when I least expected them. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened, really listened, like every word mattered. He asked questions not to pry but to understand. He wasn't in a hurry, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I needed to rush through my own feelings. Eventually, the clock struck 10. I expected him to stand, but he leaned back in the chair, as if settling in. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the best thing you can do is let someone help, even if it's just for an evening." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "And sometimes," I replied, "the hardest thing is letting them." We talked for another hour, about music, about growing up in small towns, about how both of us ended up here. He told me about his mother's garden, how he missed the smell of lilacs in spring. I told him about my father's old truck and the summer nights we used to spend sitting in the back, looking at the stars. When he finally stood to leave, there was no rush, no awkwardness. Just a sense that the evening had been exactly as long as it needed to be. At the door, he smiled again. "Thanks for dinner, Emma. And for letting me stay." "Thanks for staying," I replied. After he left, I stood in the quiet house for a long moment, realizing that not every important moment comes with fireworks or big gestures. Sometimes it's just someone staying a little longer than they had to, taking their time, and in doing so, giving you back a piece of something you thought you'd lost. That night, I slept better than I had in months. And the next day, when Daniel passed my desk at work and gave me a small nod, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was trust. And trust, I realized, could be the beginning of anything. The weeks that followed carried that same quiet connection. We'd meet for coffee, work on the community project, share small pieces of our lives in ways that felt easy. I began to notice how much lighter my days felt, how much more I looked forward to simple things. It all began because one evening, after dinner, Daniel stayed behind and took his time.